Welcome to this new episode of The Alphabet Not So Silly. In the first two videos, we saw how the Phoenician alphabet, when adapted to the Greek language, gave birth to the Greek alphabet, which then transformed into the Latin alphabet as it adapted to the Latin language. In this third video, we're going to take a closer look at the Greek and Latin origins of the letters in our alphabet, drawing on the theory proposed by Thierry de Mortain. But before diving into the heart of the subject, let's take a moment to revisit two key concepts, acrophony and acropictography. The Phoenician word aleph means ox. Its initial letter is a pictogram of an ox's head, with a triangular face and two horns on top. Acrophony is precisely when a word, in this case aleph, uses its initial letter as a pictogram, and the name of that letter is the same as the word itself. In this case, also aleph. The Greek word pili, meaning gate, also accepts its initial letter as a pictogram, the letter pi, which resembles a gate, the gate of the lionesses at Mycenae, for example. We'd say that pili is acropictographic because it uses its first letter pi as a pictogram. However, unlike in acrophony, the letter pi does not take the name of the word it depicts. For it to be acrophonic, the letter pi would have had to be called pili. Now that we've clarified these ideas, let's explore a few letters of the alphabet and their origins. If we think of the three prongs of the tool used to till the soil, we can associate the letter E with the Greek word etairo, which means to till, to cultivate, or to rake. In any case, this letter E has nothing to do with the Phoenician E, which represented the interjection he. In Latin, interestingly enough, we find several verbs related to tilling and raking that begin with E. For raking, eradere; for weeding, eruncare, exerbare, and even eligare, when referring to pulling out weeds. Each of these verbs begins with a prefix x, or simply in its shortened form, which expresses the idea of taking out, removing, extracting, as one would do with a tool for raking or weeding. These verbs thus give a pictographic meaning to the prefix x. The letter F comes from the Greek letter digamma, which looks like two gammas stacked on top of each other. It can be linked to the Latin word forcia, meaning two-pronged fork. The vertical stroke represents the handle, while the two horizontal strokes form the prongs. But we can also see in it the scythe, or faux in Latin. The vertical line would still be the handle, the smaller horizontal line in the middle represents the grip, and the longer top stroke stands for the blade. And now, finally, we understand why the two horizontal lines in the letter F aren't the same length. Let's look at the geometric figure of the letter gamma, which forms a right angle. The letter gamma originates from the Phoenician letter gimel, which means camel. Yet in Greek, the word for camel is kamelos, which has no apparent link to the letter gamma. This suggests that the evolution from gimel to gamma might have been influenced by Greek words starting with a hard g sound. Now gamma, with its two perpendicular lines, happens to be the first letter of the Greek word gonia, which means angle, corner, or even square, and which gave us the words hexagon and trigonometry. There's also goniasmos, which means the act of measuring with a square ruler. So it's possible that the letter gamma gradually settled into a shape that made more sense for Greek words and their geometric meanings. In Latin, the letter G replaced the Greek gamma phonetically. But how did this angular letter suddenly become rounded, looking more like a C? Here's a possible pictographic explanation. The Latin verbs globare and glomerare mean to round off or to gather into a ball. To form a ball of thread, for example, you start from the center and spiral outward. Also, glomus means little ball, globulus refers to a small sphere, and gluma is the skin of a fruit. All of these words evoke a rounded shape. To make a ball of yarn, you wrap thread around a spindle, starting from the center. Follow the curve. In Greek, several words can pictographically relate to the letter I, seen as a simple vertical line. Ia, the javelin, and istos, the mast of a ship. Both were crucial to the military and economic life of ancient Greece, which could explain the pictographic perception of the letter I in that culture. In Latin, the word for javelin became iaculum, spelled I-A-C-U-L-U-M, before the appearance of the letter J, pronounced like a Y. So the letter I retained a similar pictographic value as it moved from Greek to Latin. There is another angle, numerical. The Greeks used letters to represent numbers, alpha for 1, beta for 2, gamma for 3, etc. The Romans, on the other hand, used analogical representation. I for 1, II for 2, III for 3, representing 1, 2, or 3 fingers, V for 5, a hand with a thumb extended and 4 fingers together, and X for 10, 2 V's joined together, symbolizing both hands. Thus, the I represents 1 finger through a simple vertical stroke. And what do we call the finger that points and gestures? The index, a word that begins quite fittingly with I. So we might ask, is the letter I a javelin, like in Greek, or is it a finger? The Greek letter lambda, with its pointed shape formed by 2 straight lines meeting at the top, evokes the image of a spearhead. In Greek, the word loci means spear or lance. In Latin, the letter lambda was replaced by the letter L, but while lambda resembles a pointed weapon, the Latin L, with its right angle, tells a different story. One could see in the shape of the L the outline of a hoe, the agricultural tool used to till the soil. Fittingly, the Latin word for hoe is ligo. The shorter horizontal side, which lies close to the ground, represents the metal blade of the hoe. The longer vertical side stands for the handle. In this way, the letter L can be seen as a stylized depiction of a basic yet essential farming tool. Just like the letter sigma, the letter M originally had oblique lines. If we imagine that each pair of oblique lines on either side of the vertical axis represents the 2 arms of a compass, we can see that the outer points of the compass are equidistant from the central point. Now, by definition, the midpoint between 2 points is the one that lies at equal distance from the 2 extremes, hence the idea of associating the letter M with the Greek word mes, which means middle. It is also interesting to compare the letter M to the letter H and observe how these pictograms clearly differentiate 2 closely related concepts. In Latin, the prefix mes becomes mes, appearing at the beginning of several words. More importantly, the word for middle in Latin is medius, and it also begins with letter M. This coincidence suggests that the pictographic value of M remained unchanged as it moved from Greek to Latin. M stands for the middle. We can also see in it the idea of measurement, which involves repeating a fixed distance multiple times, just like one might do with a compass. Incidentally, the Latin word for measurement is mensura. Finally, if A evokes the peak of a mountain, then M could reasonably be seen as representing a mountain range, mons in Latin. The letter M would thus be 2 mountains side by side. The letter Q has no equivalent in the Greek alphabet. In Latin, Q, which had the Q sound, and was often paired with U, can be interpreted by analogy with a kanji character that represents the word white. In that kanji, the square crossed by a line symbolizes the sun, while the small diagonal stroke at the top represents a drop. The sign thus reads as drop of sun, a poetic image. Applying this logic to the letter Q, we notice that it consists of a circle, or a sphere in 3 dimensions, a perfect and ideal shape, which therefore suggests the idea of perfection. If, like in the kanji, the small diagonal line at the bottom, the tail of the Q, represents a drop, then the Q can be interpreted as a drop of perfection. This reading finds an echo in the Latin word qualitas, meaning quality. And what is quality, if not a touch of perfection? Speaking of drops, we can also think of Latin words that contain the letter Q, such as liquor, liquamen, or aqua. These terms reinforce the idea of a fluid and pure element, potentially symbolized by the letter Q itself. So the letter rho comes from the Phoenician letter res, which means head. Now, head in Greek is kephale, which gave us the word cephalalgia, or headache. So the letter rho was repurposed. Indeed, the letter rho evokes an object with a handle, whose upper part is rounded or heavy. This naturally leads us to associate it with words referring to tools or instruments with those characteristics. Thus, the letter rho may be linked to terms like ribo, meaning a stick with a curved head, reister, meaning a hammer, or ropalon, referring to a club or a door knocker. These words share the idea of a hard, solid object, often with a rounded top matching the shape of the letter rho. In Latin, the letter R preserves some resemblance to the Greek letter rho, from which it derives, but it adds an extra stroke, a curved line that descends from the upper loop to the right. Why such a graphical transformation? One might think this upper loop appears sketched by the lower strokes, as though part of an unfinished movement. Taken together, these loops resemble the meshes of a net, which is rete in Latin. The letter R may therefore be linked to the idea of fishing. The verbs restringere, to bind, and revincere, to tie up, also convey the idea of binding. And again, the letter R evokes the loop of a knotted rope, with both ends protruding, perhaps even a noose. The Latin word for rope is restis. This could subtly point to ancient themes of captivity or execution, man as prisoner, captured, tied up, or even hanged. But most importantly, the idea of repetition, present in the fisherman's repeated knotting of the net, is fully expressed in the Latin prefix re, which indicates the idea of doing something again. This prefix before a word means again or back. For instance, repito means to seek again. The letter chi was invented by the Greeks, and it is interesting to note that it is the first letter of the word chiazo, which means to arrange in the shape of an X, that is, in a cross, though not in the sense of the cross of Christ's crucifixion. And indeed, the letter X has precisely the shape of a cross. So chiasmatos refer to beams arranged in a cross shape in a framework, further reinforcing the association between the letter and the idea of a cross form. This raises the question, mere coincidence or a deliberate intention on the part of the Greeks to associate a letter of their alphabet with a word from their own language whose initial would be the very same pictogram it represents? It seems likely that this association was not simply the result of chance, but rather the outcome of a conscious desire to visually illustrate the meaning of a word through its letter. As X passed from the Greek to the Latin alphabet, it underwent a phonetic change. In Greek, it represents the k sound, whereas in Latin, it became the x sound. If in Greek it can be linked to words meaning in the shape of a cross, as we've just seen, it also appears in Latin at the end of the word crux, which means cross. In this way, the letter X retains a mnemonic connection between its shape, a cross, and the word cross. This link between the letter's form and its meaning slightly departs from the strict rule of acrophony, where a letter corresponds to a word of which it is the first letter. The letter X thus takes the form of St. Andrew's cross, with its two arms crossing diagonally. The letter zeta is quite rare in Greek, as few words begin with this letter. However, it evokes the image of lightning bolts, streaking across a stormy sky, cast down from the heavens, the top horizontal stroke, to the earth, the lower stroke, diagonally, the slanted line. Thus, the letter Z could represent the word zale, meaning storm or tempest. It's also worth remembering that Zeus, the supreme god in Greek mythology, ruled over lightnings and storms, further reinforcing the association between the letter Z and these powerful and destructive natural phenomena. To Zeus's lightning bolts, the Romans may have preferred the stripes of the zebra, Equus zebra, but the letter Z had even more limited use in Latin than in Greek. The letter W came much later and was initially used in the north. In any case, it was not invented by either the Greeks or the Romans. It's easy to associate it with the English word wave or the German Welle, both of which mean wave. W is simply a waveform. When repeated endlessly, it looked like this. And so we arrive at the end of our alphabetical journey, now equipped with a few more insights into the letters we use every day. But before we conclude, let's take one final walk through the alphabet, this time as an illustrated abecedary. As we look more closely at the shapes of the letters around us, we begin to see them as echoes of nature, human gestures, animals, tools, or abstract ideas. In nature, the letter A recalls the peak of a mountain, while M evokes a mountain range. D suggests a half moon, and C the crescent. Q, with its drop-shaped tail, calls to mind water, liquid, or even a single droplet. In the realm of the human body and its gestures, O becomes an eye, and I resembles a finger, perhaps the index. Y symbolizes the female pelvis, and Q can also stand for quality, or way of being. V gestures towards victory. U speaks of union. The letter R evokes the idea of a knot, a bond. It may recall chains, a prisoner, or a captive. Among animals, Z brings to mind the stripes of a zebra, while S slithers like a snake. O, once again, is both the egg and the eye. In the world of plants, O is for the olive, and G suggests the wrinkled skin of a fruit. Tools and trades are also hidden in the letters. I may be seen as a warrior's javelin, B as a ballista, P is a pan in the kitchen, and R is the mesh of a fishing net. C is a curve of a forged object, or a horn. G relates to the coiling of wool into a ball. F could be a sickle or a fork. L, shaped like a right angle, is a hoe. N recalls a woven pattern. E, a rake or a hoeing motion. T is a balance scale, used in justice or trade. And U, once more, represents unity, perhaps in politics. In geometry, I is a straight line, X is a cross, H stands for half, M for middle, D is a semicircle, and O is a perfect circle. In architecture and measurement, M again plays a central role. It embodies the middle point found with a compass and the very concept of measure itself. And so ends our journey into the shapes and meanings of the alphabet, a shared memory stretching from ancient Greece and Rome to the modern world. Thank you for joining us, and see you soon for more discoveries.